Okay, so we'll kick off now. So this month, what we try to do at Actus is come up with a theme each month where we can really dig deep into it and come up with some useful information, we'd like to think. The topic that we wanted to do for a while is the topic of diversity. And I have to say, I was a little bit nervous about it, to be perfectly honest. I'll explain why in a moment, because I've not got loads of experience in this area. So our topic in September is all about diversity. And I've spent quite a lot of time researching this. And also, you'll notice if you listen to the podcast that I host, and perhaps this is a good opportunity for me to introduce you. Oh, welcome, Anita from Chicago. We have got people further afield here. So those of you who are new onto this, you may not know or have come across me. So my name is Lucinda. So I've got a background in corporate learning and development, and that perhaps links into, I said that back in the day when I worked at Siemens and I worked at Pfizer before that. Interestingly, diversity wasn't really a thing that people focused on, if I'm honest. In fact, I was a senior manager at Siemens, and I remember someone saying to me I was one of only 2 senior managers at that level in a business of 2,000 people, and that's when they were thinking about diversity just in terms of male female. So I am interested because I think the world has moved on a lot in terms of that. So I'd like to think it has, but it's just interesting how much it has opened up and how I guess what good looks like is new. And I think I looked at this from the point of view is what would I be doing if I was in an internal organizational development, learning and development role in there. And this is what this is. So hopefully I've looked at some research from McKinsey and CIPD. This will be useful to you, but also, as ever, really interested in anything that you guys have to bring to the party in terms of sharing your knowledge and experience here that others can learn from. So that's a little bit about my background and why I was a little bit nervous about this topic, because I didn't do it when I was in my job, but I've had to look at what's relevant here. In terms of what I've done since I worked in larger organisations, well, I run Actus, so some of you may know that or may not. We've been running these webinars for almost 2 years, and it took us about a year to realise that no one knew what Actus did. So just in case you don't know what Actus does, we're a software business, so a software and a learning business. So we offer a complete performance, talent and learning management suite. So should you be interested in anything like that, do take a look. And also we've got a whole range of virtual and online learning tools and programs. So we've got lots of e-learning for people managers. There's an Actus Academy, which is an on-demand learning platform. We've got 2 really popular programs that we run regularly. One's just kicked off, which is our hybrid manager program, and our virtual change superhero training, which I run personally, is kicking off. Next one's kicking off in November. So on to the focus of this particular webinar. What I'm going to look at, and actually we've got 2 webinars on the topic of diversity because it's quite meaty over the course of September. So if this is something you want to look at in more detail, do feel free to sign up for the one that we have later in the month. So what we're going to focus on here is we're going to look at what we mean by diversity and think about it in terms of, if you are wondering about focusing on diversity yourself within your organisation, how do you decide which aspects you want to focus on? How do you benchmark it? We'll also look at how can you be strategic about this, and just some of the feedback and learnings from others in terms of the data that's out there. So that's what we're going to cover over the next half hour. Usually these take about half an hour, 40 minutes. We are recording it, so if you've only got half an hour, don't worry, we will automatically send out to you a link to the recording and slides, so those will come out to you anyway. So my first question is, what brings you to this topic? Are you just interested in it generally in terms of your overall development, or do some of you have a specific diversity responsibility? Or is this something that you want to encourage your organisation to do more about? What is it that brings you to this topic? Use the chat and let us know why you're here, so I get an idea of you know what brings you to this topic, and have we got experts out there already, or is this something that, like me, you'd have to research a bit? Great. So Joe, you're launching a diversity committee, and Joe, tell me a little bit more. A few of you here have got. Hi, I'm here. So if you've got something there where you're launching something, is thinking about is that something strategic where you want to decide what to do, or is it in response to something? That's perhaps something we look at later, thinking about what the purpose is of what you want to achieve, because it's such a broad topic. Right, lots of you. Hi, Laura, you've been given responsibility for diversity. Okay, so it is interesting, isn't it? So it's a topic that is come to the forefront, and I think what we need to be able to do is be quite strategic about it and think about how can we, because you can't just, you don't want to do, one of the things that I think is really important with diversity is you don't want to just pay lip service. You need to be strategic, and you need to think about what it is you are trying to achieve in terms of a diversity committee or a diversity working group, or whatever it is that you might have in place. So you sort of see that these are things that many of you are looking at topically. Hi, Ryan. Okay. Good to see that you're also taking that on. So really nice to have some regulars on here. So great to have some friends in the chat. So when we're looking at this, we say, well, what do we really mean when we talk about diversity and inclusion? And again, these conversations, D&I, what's the right terminology for this? There's I think it's almost a minefield, actually, is knowing what it is. But what we're saying here, or the definition, and I do default very often to the CIPD on this and put my own twist on it, is about diversity and inclusion is about recognizing that although we have things in common, we are also different in many ways. And the key thing about that, we're different in many ways, and that's absolutely fine. And that could be in terms of, it can be in terms of race, gender, or all the typical sort of attributes that we might think about in terms of diversity and inclusion, but you know, it's also in terms of personalities. People, we are different in many, many ways in which we differ. And so trying to make everyone the same actually isn't beneficial to the organization. And how can we therefore get people to embrace differences and in fact celebrate differences? That's really what we're talking about here. So inclusion is about us recognizing that these differences are going to bring benefits, including a better working environment, and we're going to make better decisions. When I go further into this, I'll share with you some of the research that came from McKinsey, and it goes an extra further angle to this in terms of the business case for this, that there's actually a lot of evidence that if you are if you're a private company, that actually it's more profitable as well to do that. And if you, I know I've got people here from public sector and NHS, that is this about getting the right talent? Is it about treating people fairly? And I mean, maybe this is where this following poll is a good question to ask you here. If you're here, and I notice that a number of you are taking on roles, which are new roles, maybe setting up councils, maybe focusing on something, I'm interested in understanding which of the reasons is encouraging your organisation to buy into diversity. Or you could ask it another way, why is your organisation interested in this particular this reason? So let me just pop the poll up for you. So if you put this one in, so have a look here. Why is that important for your organisation? If you are here because your organisation, what is the main reason? I appreciate there could be more than one. What's the main reason that your organisation is looking at this? And if I haven't come up with the reason that's relevant to your organisation, which I might not have, then do please let us know in the chat if we've missed something. Trish, interested because your company is not as diverse as it should be in this day and age. Well, I completely agree. I certainly remember the business that I worked with. I thought if I was one of only 2 females, and that was only 10, 12 years ago. Yeah, it's the right thing to do, Amir. Totally. So I can say that, yes, sheer equality, I suppose, that's the principled answer, isn't it? So you're doing well. We're up to 70% participation. So I'll just give you a few more seconds and I can share the responses and you can see actually what the different reasons are that you guys have come up with. Okay, so 79%. If anyone finally wants to go, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to end and share the poll. Yeah, it's interesting. So you're seeing sort of endemic inequity, says Anita here, and I'm sure that's, you're not just, higher education is not going to be the only one there, and there's a root cause, because if you don't get the right people in the first place, then I guess you're not going to have equality of professors and things like that, I'm guessing, Anita. So notice here the reasons that we've got, actually we have a wide range of reasons across it. About 55% of you going because it's the right thing to do as in your organisation, because it's sheer equality. Others are saying it's about demonstrating the values of the organisation. Better access to talent is another one here. That's the third one, but actually overall employer brand and increased performance. So there's quite a wide range. The employer brand is interesting, isn't it? So is that about demonstrating your values to the external marketplace? So it could be in terms of those two perhaps linked together, your employer brand and your access to talent, if you position yourself equally in that way. So there's many reasons why you might encourage your organisation to buy into diversity. But the reality is, if you are looking to set up, I guess, a forum that's going to have what I would describe as teeth, that's going to be taken seriously by your, let's say, your board or your executive team, where they're going to support you if you put in place initiatives, and you're going to feel like you can actually do something meaningful, then you've also got to come up with some kind of business case usually for these. And I thought this data that came through from McKinsey was showing that actually there's a really high business case for diversity in executive teams, which obviously means if you want to have diverse executive teams, you need to be developing a talent pipeline which is diverse as well, and you need to be recruiting diverse talent. Otherwise you can't just pluck out diverse people and bring them in at executive level. You really need to grow your own pipeline of that in every way. And of course, if you have a very, and back to the point that was made by Anita there in terms of inequity, if you don't have a diverse group of people coming into the organisation, performing in the organisation, being retained by the organisation, being rewarded by the organisation and developed, then you are not going to have a diverse executive team. And this data here, just to make sense of it, because it's sometimes useful, this is linked to financial performance, but there are other indicators that you can see if you go and search out this research. And they showed over 5 years, from 2014 to 2019, that the gap is increasing. So in terms of gender diversity, the difference between the top and the bottom quartile performing organisations, financial, profitable, that actually more diverse executive teams in terms of gender were 25% more profitable. And in terms of ethnic diversity, they were 36% more profitable. And you can see that actually those have increased over the 5-year term, that gap's increased, and actually the more diverse it was, the more profitable or effective it was. Now, one thing that's interesting here is the McKinsey report said they felt that the progress was slow, because they were saying that female representatives on executive boards in the UK and the US, which most of this data is from, was moving from 15 to 20% from 2014 to 2019. Now, I don't know whether it's just my mindset, but I actually thought that increasing by 5%, or that proportion in 5 years wasn't bad. But they consider that to be very, very slow, because I think if you're going to do it properly, you can't just parachute people in. You have to have a longer term strategy, and that's perhaps what a message that I say for you guys here is, it may not change overnight. You don't want to necessarily put quotas in things, but what we need to talk about is strategically, what do you do to build that talent pipeline and ensure that it's diverse. I don't know whether any of the rest of you think, whether you think that's slow or fast. I thought McKinsey thinks it's slow. But I was thinking, I'm not sure whether it's really slow. It'd be great if it was quicker, but I'd rather people did it better. They also said that the diversity in terms of ethnic minorities in US and UK was up from 7% in 2014 to 14% in 2017. So that is a doubling in that period of time. So that's interesting. So I would have thought that was progress. One of the main points, however, that they did say is that 1/3 of businesses have made little or no progress. So I suppose that's the question here. Are you in an organization that has made progress and is actively doing it, or are you a business where you're trying to catch up? Because and the real fear point, and maybe if this is something you're trying to get executive sponsorship and support with, making that business case is actually we can be more profitable, or often that would be in terms of more effective in delivering outcomes. With, you know, it's more effective overall. Profit is just an easy metric that resonates highly and at board level. Then to be more effective as an overall organisation, we need to have a more diverse executive team. And a third of businesses are doing little or nothing. So if we're in that one, then we really do need to push things forward, because that gives you a competitive advantage. So in terms of those of you now who've moved into areas where you are looking at diversity, this is a multi-choice poll. I'm wondering, which areas are you measuring or focusing on? I'll say my poll, has the poll gone up? It's a little bit, oh, there we go. It's being a little bit flaky for me, the setup on the polls. Let's see. Which metrics are you measuring within your organisations? And you can choose more than one. So I'll give you a few moments just to put those up there. And what I'll do is I'll run through some other figures while the poll is running. So the reality is that although the gender pay gap we've been monitoring tonight, and I can see it's not going to surprise you that most of you, because you have to legally do, are oh gosh, and nearly 100%, that's it, have responded. Oh no, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. 67% have responded. Most of us are looking at that. The reality is that the gender pay gap is still considered to be stubbornly high. Reporting has meant that businesses are looking at it more so, but it's very much seen that more work is needed. There's lots of statistics which are concerning, I would say, about men and women being more likely than men to be subject to sexual harassment at work. They said that 11% of mothers reported that they were either dismissed, made compulsory redundant, where others were not, or treated so poorly they felt they had to leave their jobs. So there's quite a lot in terms of the gender pay gap. There's still a long way to go in terms of the UK stats, certainly. The position from the CIPD is there to saying actually it really should be addressed, and I'm sure you'd all agree with this, because we're missing out on a wealth of talent, as well as damaging our brand, if you like, as an employer. So all of those things. But they're saying that it's really about what we do with it. If there is an issue, it's about dealing with it. So there's quite a lot of research in terms of men and female and also racial equality. So in terms of ethnic minorities, again, there's a big gap there, and they showed that this is doubled. If you then look at female ethnic minorities, then in senior leadership roles, there's a real disparity there. So there's plenty of work to be done in these areas. And I say that's still something that goes through. Looking at age, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm thinking this whole concept of the Great Resignation, whether this is real or not, but the skills that over 50s in the workplace have got, you know, actually, are we losing out on key skills by not being able to enable people to share those skills, or not keeping people in work in terms of older workers? So are we making it easier or more difficult for them to enter or re-enter the workplace? I think one of this whole aspect of the flexible working piece, which has come to the fore since COVID, obviously not every organisation can manage that, but that can make a difference, because it's not just, let's say, people with children. Older workers might want to have more flexibility. Anyone might want more flexibility. So the reality is, we know there are labour shortages. We know lots of people are leaving organisations. We have to be more effective as employers in terms of recruiting, training and retaining staff of all types across the gender, race, but also thinking more widely in terms of age, disability, and just being more involved in terms of that. So looking at this, your polls here, sharing the results here, you can see that a lot of them you are measuring. The one that is least likely to be monitored is religion. And whether it's monitored or it's you just capture the information, I guess, is the interesting thing. And that's what we'll go on to discuss as to what you do with this data. So it's all very well. We're tracking gender, we're tracking race, tracking age, we're tracking these areas. But what do we do with that data? And there's kind of a so what factor, because we need to do something, have a purpose to doing this. So in terms of the practicalities of what I think we might want to do, if you're thinking, where do I go from here? Or what do I do on our first diversity committee? These are the sort of things, this is where I would start, and this is where some of the suggestions have been. So it's all about benchmarking. We know that HR is increasingly about data or having the data, and it's what do we do with the data. So first of all, maybe take a step back and start benchmarking or just critically evaluating what your culture is like. Would you say you have a inclusive culture or not? And if you think you have, what is your evidence for that? How objective are you in terms of that? On the other hand, it may be you've got specific evidence of people not being inclusive. So I can think of organizations that I've worked with where they had some issues around discrimination and harassment. And what was interesting when they dug into it, and you do quite often see these certain themes of organizations where it's a culture that's been in place for quite a long period of time, and it's often quite hierarchical, and occasionally you'd hear people raising concerns or grievances, and if those are investigated, it would be picked up, people say, oh, but I was just joking, or it's just banter. Now, one term that I don't think I'd even come across 2 years ago is this concept of microaggressions, and actually banter is definitely something that people who are in a minority group often feel that those are the microaggressions that make people feel out of group as opposed to in the group. So is there something in your culture where there are cliques, where there is a culture of banter, however well-meaning or inverted, people do not realize that that's something that is not supporting an inclusive organization? So that would be a negative indicator, I guess, and it may well be in certain pockets or certain areas. Maybe people have been there in a certain way and they're just unaware of what's acceptable. Interestingly, you can have generational differences there. I'm thinking of my 17-year-old daughter having a conversation with her 75-year-old granddad, and they have very different views on things. So celebrating and encouraging differences, open and honesty. There are real differences in how people perceive things. And I guess there's something as an organization to identify what is acceptable and what isn't. And it may be that things that were acceptable in the past are no longer acceptable, and you need to be overt as an organization as to what type of language, communication, approaches are inclusive, are there. Positively, you say, on the other hand, do you actively celebrate and encourage differences? So are there any examples where you celebrate, let's say, different religious holidays, or people are aware and utilize differences in each other? So there could be positive examples of where you're inclusive as a culture, and those could be broadened out potentially. Then you've got the sort of unconscious discrimination there, which, Friday pub culture, coffee days, toilet setup. So do you have inclusive toilets or those sort of things, access to prayer rooms or working hours? Now, quite a lot of those there, it's interesting, are probably things that were just the way they used to be. And there is a question as to whether you would want to change that or not, in terms of if everyone goes down the pub on a Friday, is that something that is an issue or not? Does that discriminate against people who don't like to go to the pub or are unable to? And I think maybe it's about thinking, how can you maximize the opportunities for people to be involved, to join together? I mean, working hours is a great example of those, is that not everybody can do things after work or out of work setup. So it's really being very aware and considerate perhaps of others and the impact of things that have maybe worked for forever, how inclusive they are really, and maybe looking for opportunities to come up with a wide range of activities, social events that are inclusive. Then there's the things in terms of looking at your data, and this does depend whether or not you can pull data out of a system if you've got one. But this is where, if you've got a system like ours, I would recommend that you could look at, if you do things like performance related pay, if you have promotion panels can you pull that data and do a bit of backwards research and say, if I look at my existing demographics, for example, let's say we have 30% women and 70% men, just for argument's sake, and I look at how many people get nominated for promotion, do we get a 30-70 split or a different than that split? In terms of those that go through promotion, do we have that same split? So is there any unconscious bias that you need to be aware of in terms of your employee life cycle? Are you bringing people through, and I'm using male, female for ease, but any of your demographics you could look at. Admittedly, it depends on the size of the organization, how easy it is. I guess if you only have one disabled person, if it's harder to be representative, but just maybe benchmark whether you think there is an unconscious issue in terms of your the parity of access to promotion or opportunity. But remember, what we want to do is get a really good representative executive or set of leaders, this whole leadership pipeline concept. And then, of course, also look at recruitment statistics for bias. I know lots of organisations now have become really good at this, where they take out anything that might allow you to be biased. You're just literally looking at people's experience. So you're not looking at names or age or anything like that. In terms of things, let's say those are the things where you think, right, where are we currently? So those are the things just to take a step back, and maybe if you have got a diversity committee, this is the sort of thing you could pick a couple of topics of this and discuss them. What are people's real experiences, or could they go and get more information for others on those? You then might want to put in place some strategic metrics, which would allow you, once you benchmark where you are, think about where do we want to be? And these might make their way onto your organisational balance scorecard. So if you are an organisation that does performance ratings, for example, you might want to make sure that you have a parity in terms of how ratings pan out, or certainly, within a normal distribution. You might want to look at whether or not those people who've had pay increases have been proportionately allocated. I mentioned earlier, promotion, percentage incentive, senior roles. What about looking at your exit stats? So do you have a disproportionate number of ethnic minorities leaving within 2 years, for example? If you do, then that is quite a strong indicator that your culture is not inclusive, I would argue, or you'd certainly want to know why. I mean, even more so if you've got any evidence from people saying a exit interview. And engagement scores. What about, most of you will be doing engagement scores or have some sort of employee survey. Is there any difference in terms of the different feedback, the results that people are sharing between the different minority groups? So those are all metrics. I think you've got to start with, where are we currently? So taking a step back, asking people for sort of anecdotal information, and then also looking at strategic metrics where you can get that HR data and cut it with your demographic data. Then, of course, thinking, where do you focus first? Well, I don't think there's a right answer to this, but where I would focus first is if I found evidence of current discrimination. So there being harassment, or a culture of banter in a certain area, or a loss of talent from a certain part of the organisation, I would want to focus in on that first. And how you focus in on that would depend on what it was and where you were, but I would probably want to look at that in terms of a focused, make that area of the organisation, or whoever is responsible for that area of the organisation, make them aware of it. If it's the whole organisation, then it is a whole organisation awareness activity, making people aware that we have a gap here, we have an issue here, and also restating or re-establishing what the expectations are. So I've seen things like charters or restating of what kind of communication is acceptable or not, words that are acceptable or not. And there's lots of information there that you can do it. So I'd start with, if you think you have got an issue when you take a step back, then I'd focus in on that. Then if that isn't the case, but actually you're wanting to look at it for talent management or other areas, then I'd be inclined to focus on, these all kind of tie into each other, one of these areas first. So are you losing key talent groups? Well, that costs you money if you are losing key talent groups. So I'd want to work out what the cause of that talent loss is. On the other hand, I could also think, well, I need key skills or talent. So maybe I need to recruit more diversely and make sure that we are really looking broadly in terms of, and we haven't got lots of bias in our interview process. And then the other area of it is within the organisation is thinking, how diverse is our leadership pipeline, and are people getting equal access to development and leadership in there? And there are lots of things you can do to solve those or to improve this. So step-by-step recommendations here is, first of all, if you've got an issue, acknowledge it, and then get people to realise there is an issue and get others to acknowledge it. Secondly, it's about hardwiring diversity and inclusion into your processes and your language. So that's about celebrating commitment. It's about giving people guidelines that will guide behaviour here. It could be about looking at things like making sure that your people specs when you are recruiting are written in language, gender, or even class neutral language. Another area in terms of diversity. Put in place things like a zero tolerance. Just be very clear, we have a zero tolerance for discriminatory behaviour. So bullying or harassment, and being clear about what that could look like. So bringing to the fore what a microaggression might be. So you think it's banter, I think it's discrimination. Helping people to get to the same shared understanding, because to some extent we might be redefining norms in our organisation. And be prepared to definitely get senior managers buy-in there and commitment to this. And that's where the stats and the numbers can be really helpful. Just make sure that it's not something that's just lip service. That would be one of my things. I think you want people to do it properly, because then they know it's the right thing to do, and be absolutely properly behind it, as opposed to doing a tick box exercise in some sort of compliance approach. Do continue to collect and analyse high quality diversity data, obviously within the realms of GDPR and being, anonymity and things like that, because really you only need high level metrics. It's about benchmarking. It's not about identifying one person who is being discriminatory, although that would be a performance issue if you were to identify that, but it wouldn't be through the data. You're doing that. The data is about you making sure you've got benchmarks that you can build on, and you can see whether over the next 18 months to 5 years you're progressing. Design holistic diversity training. Let's talk about that. That's about making sure it's throughout. It's not just about go on an unconscious bias training course, because I'm sure most of us are aware that actually it's not supposed to be all that effective. But when you've got a leadership development program or an interviewing skills program, make sure that diversity is woven within it, so it becomes part of everything you do. In terms of your induction, making sure that this is the language that we use, this is our inclusive language. Maybe is it included in your values, making something overt in terms of being inclusive in part of your values. So make sure that diversity is holistic as opposed to tactical. Having said that, I think you could argue that mentorship is tactical in some ways, but mentorship is something that is really powerful. You can have upward mentorship, but certainly when I've done things on women in tech, or also all types of diversity in terms of ethnic minorities in there, having a mentor or having role models, I appreciate it can mean that there are a small group of people who end up being those mentors or role models, and I don't think therefore you have to, if you happen to be a black female on the executive board, then might be inundated with requirements for mentoring, which is a bit unfair. We should all, as mentors, be mentoring diversity. So this is the key here, but putting mentorship in place where diversity is part of it. But be ambitious in taking positive action on it and getting people to talk about it, because it is something that I think it's quite hard. Personally, I feel always nervous about what's the right terminology? Have I used the wrong language? Interestingly, the CIPD talk about ethnic minorities being the correct term. Others talk about BAME. Maybe it depends on the culture. So, and you can all shout at me in the chat if I'm getting it wrong, and do not mean to do so. It is something where I think we're all learning and it's evolving, and what is the right terminology there, because often the intentions can be people trying to be inclusive, but we don't have the language yet to do it. But being ambitious and talking about it in a positive way is really what we should be looking to do. So those are the key recommendations and suggestions. Really welcome any comments. Have any of you done anything like this, or has anyone done something that isn't on here that would be really useful to share? Would love it if anyone's got anything they could put in the chat. The other thing is there something on here that you think you can do? if you want to start really small, a really easy way to do is to start with an inclusion calendar, and you can download this from CIPD, where it tells you all the different things that go on and the different ways in which you could celebrate religious festivals, awareness days. So there's absolutely huge there in terms of inclusion calendar. So that could be something that you can do. So do let me know what you think you might be able to do, or any feedback that you've got there. So we're looking at an employee resource group. Laura, what is an employee resource group? You want to unmute? Would you be happy just to tell us? Is that about as like a stakeholder group? I know Laura, so I know she's not too shy, hopefully. Might have put her on the spot, nevertheless. You can tell me if you don't want to. Are you able to? Anyone else got? I'll just stuff. So yeah, Amy, so are these, because I've one of the podcasts that's coming out the week after next is about this, is about having a representative groups. Is that what we're talking about here with employee resource groups, staff networks, where you have got a representative group in there that you get people, that you keep people involved in it. So it's a community of safe environment for people to share experiences. So Priya's got women's ones, very active. So what you're doing is you're disseminating this. Yeah, I saw Steph, you're having problems. I'm glad you managed to make it in again. So Katie, you've got Embrace Your Learning and Development Group. So is that, no, sorry, that inclusion and diversity. And I read that as L&D. I thought I was a bit confused as how that was Embrace. Okay, that's your Indeed group. So an interesting one with the guy that I was talking about on the podcast, he sort of said that it's useful if you can have a really diverse employee group, and then if you want to go into women's network or other specifics, then those can almost kind of spin off. But he thought it was really useful to have an overall group where, I think, as you're saying, people can share experiences, because that actually goes a really long way to build awareness. So if I go, oh gosh, I did not realize that that's something that if you are in a wheelchair or have a disability, a hidden disability, I wouldn't realize that something that I might do would be unconsciously discriminating. So it's quite a useful way to have, if you have a really broad group and people are starting to share those experiences. So many of you are saying definitely start with having a staff network or something there in terms of employee resource group. So Diane says, how would you do this in a small organization? Interestingly, I know that we have got Ryan on here who's in a small organization. So I don't know whether anything you want to pop in. What's the thinking there? Is it about initiatives, or is it just about making sure that you are aware from day one, that you're inclusive from day one? I mean, we're quite a small organization. It's an interesting one because we don't necessarily talk about it overtly, although we do have quite a diverse we have quite a diverse employee group. So Adam's saying a diverse steering group is a really good way to take the lead, because smaller groups risk becoming exclusive. Yeah, Adam, that's exactly what came through in the conversation, I think, rather than inclusive. So if you have a diverse overall group, and then if there are splinter groups, yes, otherwise you may end up that there almost is a discrimination from that smaller splinter group. Okay, well, I'll keep an eye on the chat. So if anyone has got anything that if you want to listen in more depth, say there's 3 podcasts coming out on the HR Uprising all about this topic, where we're doing this. I'll come back and read what Caroline's saying, which that's useful. We are talking about in our next webinar about diverse and effective teams. That is more about team building as to how you do that. And then in October, we're talking about well-being. So that's something that's become back to the fore in terms of well-being, with a focus on resilience. So how can we encourage people to be well and resilient in this sort of ongoing hybrid flexibility? I'm launching this month something called the HR Uprising Coffee Club. It's entirely free. If you're part of the HR Uprising LinkedIn group, you might be interested. The idea there is we're just going to pick a topic each month and get people together with a coffee. And I will limit the numbers just to make sure people can talk, but we'll run it on Zoom so people can go into smaller groups. So let's say we've got a bunch of people here from a housing association. I might put them into smaller groups so that they can share ideas within that area. So we're running the first one. If you want to do that, you can register. You'll get the links out tomorrow for that, if that's something of interest to you. We're trying to facilitate collaboration. So if that's something that you want us to see if we can help, then that's what we'll do. And there's a link to the training. So let me just go here. Caroline's saying, Be cautious about asking members of your team that have protected characteristics of doing the emotional heavy lifting in terms of upskilling, teaching others. Yes, it's almost putting all the pressure on the person who is in the minority, isn't it, there? So it's about us all taking responsibility. Ryan's saying you want to make sure that your values are growing appropriately in terms of them putting it at the heart. So great to start as you mean to go on, isn't it? Caitlin has just dropped into the chat. If you want to sign up for the coffee club, the link's in the chat, so it's easy to get to. It'll also come out on the emails tomorrow. Management training programs, promoted those before. If you want to know more about those, here's our virtual management training program that's just kicked off. The change management one's coming later, and there's other links that you can access any of this. So if there's anything else you want to follow up on, or we can do more on, please do feel free to connect to any of those links. So I will wrap that up there. Thank you very much for joining. One final poll: if you want to chat about this specifically, actually, I know I've got some of our existing customers on here. Thank you. I mean, we've talked about this. If you want to talk specifically customers as to how you can do that in your organisation, do message me, because we can help you with the software, how we can align it to make sure you're giving you the data you want. If you are someone who isn't working with us currently but would like to understand more about what we do, then I'll just pop this poll up. There's no pressure, but if you want a chat, a follow-up chat from myself or one of the team, then you can just pop in there in the chat, and we'll be able to just ping you a message after this. Okay, so thank you so much for joining, and thank you for being involved as ever. Do join a future webinar if you've got other topics you'd like us to do more on. I'd love to know more about that as well. Yeah, I think it'd be good. I mean, we talked about it a few months ago, didn't we? So it might be a good time to get back into that.